The late afternoon sun bathed our suburban home in a golden glow as I pulled into the driveway. After a grueling day at the office, all I wanted was the comfort of my home and the warmth of my wife, Emily. Our two-story house stood like a symbol of the life we had built together, solid, dependable, and filled with memories of 8 years of marriage. As I stepped inside, the smell of lavender from Emily's diffuser greeted me, mingling with the faint aroma of freshly baked cookies. Emily had always been good at creating a cozy, inviting atmosphere, one that felt like a safe haven after long days like this. "Hey, babe," she called from the kitchen, her voice cheerful. "How was work?" "Busy as always," I replied, setting my briefcase by the door and walking toward her. "But seeing you makes it better." She smiled, leaning up to kiss me lightly on the cheek. Her auburn hair was swept into a casual ponytail, and she wore a loose sweater that still somehow managed to flatter her figure. Emily always had a way of looking effortlessly beautiful. We settled into our usual evening routine: dinner, a glass of wine, and a show we'd been binging. Emily laughed at the jokes, her green eyes sparkling, and for a while, all seemed right with the world. But as the night wore on, I noticed the faintest trace of unease in her demeanor, quick glances at her phone, an unreadable expression flashing across her face now and then. I brushed it off. Emily had always been busy with her online crafting business, and her phone was her lifeline for orders and updates. She was meticulous and devoted, traits I had always admired in her. It wasn't until the following weekend that something began to nag at the edges of my awareness. My best friend, Jake, came over for our regular poker night. Jake had been a part of my life long before Emily entered it, our bond forged through high school football games, college road trips, and countless memories. Emily greeted him warmly when he arrived, her laughter ringing out as they exchanged friendly banter. Jake was his usual charming self, but for reasons I couldn't quite place, something about the way they interacted seemed different. Their jokes felt slightly more intimate, their glances lingering just a second too long. "You okay, man?" Jake asked later, as we played a round on the patio. His tone was casual, but his eyes held genuine concern. "Yeah, of course," I said, shaking off the thought. "Just work stress, I guess." Jake clapped me on the back. "Don't let it get to you. You've got a good thing going here, beautiful wife, great house. You're living the dream, bro." I nodded, forcing a smile. Jake was right. I was living the dream, wasn't I? But the seed of doubt had been planted, and over the next few weeks it grew. Emily's late-night phone use became more frequent, and she started dressing up more than usual, even for casual outings. Her explanations were always plausible: a meeting with a potential client, a quick trip to the store, but they lacked her usual warmth. One evening, as she showered, I noticed her phone left unlocked on the kitchen counter. The screen lit up with a message from Jake. "Can't stop thinking about last night. You're amazing." The message on Emily's phone burned into my mind. I stared at it for what felt like hours, the words twisting in my gut like a knife. My hand trembled as I reached for the device, my heart pounding against my ribs. Was it a joke? Some kind of prank between friends? Or was it something more insidious? Before I could open the conversation to read more, the sound of the water shutting off upstairs jolted me back to reality. Panic surged through me. My mind raced for a course of action, any action. In a rush, I set the phone back down exactly as I'd found it, and moved to the couch, grabbing the TV remote to fake casualness. Emily's footsteps echoed down the stairs. She appeared in the living room moments later, her hair wrapped in a towel and wearing her oversized pajama top, the one I had bought her on a whim during our last vacation. She smiled as she walked over, her expression warm and relaxed. "Hey, what are you watching?" she asked, plopping down beside me. I felt the weight of her presence as she curled up next to me, the towel slipping slightly to reveal damp strands of auburn hair. Her scent, lavender shampoo, wrapped around me like a cruel reminder of the life we'd built together. "Just flipping channels," I said, my voice somehow even. "Nothing interesting." She hummed, resting her head against my shoulder. "You've been quiet tonight." Everything okay? My throat tightened. Yeah. Just a long day. Her hand reached for mine, giving it a squeeze. You've been working so hard. I was thinking we should plan a getaway soon. Just the two of us. What do you think? The suggestion hit me like a blow. My mind screamed with the hypocrisy of it all. A romantic getaway while she was texting my best friend things like "can't stop thinking about last night"? That sounds nice. I lied, swallowing the bow rising in my throat. She smiled and nestled closer. The warmth of her body against mine was unbearable, and I excused myself soon after, muttering something about an early morning at work. She didn't question it, simply kissed my cheek and let me retreat to our bedroom. Behind the closed door, I sat on the edge of the bed, head in my hands. My thoughts churned, replaying every interaction between Emily and Jake that I had ever witnessed. Had it always been there? Those sly smiles, the inside jokes, the way she seemed to light up around him. I'd been blind, but was it blindness born of trust or sheer stupidity? Sleep didn't come that night. When the first light of dawn broke, I had already resolved to get answers. The idea of confronting Emily head-on terrified me. If I was wrong, I would destroy the trust between us. But if I was right, I decided on a different approach. Discretion was key. I needed proof, something undeniable, before I could take any steps. My mind raced through possibilities before I settled on the only viable option: hiring a private investigator. The next morning, I left for work as usual but made a detour to the downtown office of a man I'd heard about through mutual acquaintances. James Griffin was his name, a PI with a reputation for thoroughness and discretion. His office was modest, tucked into a strip mall, but when I walked in, the air of professionalism was undeniable. A burly man in his early 40s, Griffin listened intently as I recounted my suspicions. "I need to know if I'm just being paranoid," I told him, my voice barely above a whisper. "But if I'm not?" Griffin nodded, his expression calm. "It's better to know either way. If there's nothing to find, you'll have peace of mind. If there is, you'll have what you need to decide your next steps." He laid out the plan: discreet surveillance on Emily and Jake, monitoring their phone activity, and tracking any unusual movements. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't hesitate. As I handed over the initial payment, a wave of guilt swept through me. This wasn't who I was, sneaking around, spying on my wife. But the alternative was unbearable. Over the next week, I tried to act normal. At home, Emily was her usual self, warm, attentive, and affectionate. If anything, she seemed more so than usual, as though she was compensating for something. Jake dropped by once for another poker night, his laughter and charm filling the room as if nothing was amiss. Watching the two of them interact was like torture, every shared glance or casual touch feeling like a dagger to my chest. Griffin kept me updated with periodic reports. "Nothing concrete yet," he said during our second meeting. "They've exchanged texts, but it's mostly vague stuff. Could just be friendly." Friendly. The word felt like a cruel joke. Then, one evening, Griffin called with an update that changed everything. "Your wife and your friend are planning to meet tomorrow afternoon at your house. You told me you'd be at work." "Yes," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll make an excuse to come home early." "Good. If there's something to uncover, we'll find it." The line went dead, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the cold reality of what might lie ahead. The next day crawled by like molasses. My usual rhythm at the office was obliterated by the swirling storm in my head. Every meeting, every email, and every phone call felt inconsequential compared to what I knew was coming. By 2 p.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I emailed my boss, feigning a headache and excusing myself for the day. Driving home, my hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, the tension building with every mile. Griffin's words echoed in my mind: "If there's something to uncover, we'll find it." When I pulled into the driveway, I turned off the car and sat there, staring at the house. Our house. The place we had built our life together. I had proposed to Emily in the backyard under the stars, celebrated countless anniversaries in the dining room, and spent lazy Sunday mornings in the living room. Now, it felt like a stranger's house. I saw Griffin's car parked discreetly down the street. He'd arrived earlier to set up surveillance, and I knew he was somewhere nearby, documenting everything. With a deep breath, I entered the house as quietly as possible. The air inside was still, almost oppressively so. My heart pounded as I moved through the empty rooms, scanning for any sign of Emily or Jake. Then I heard it, a faint laugh from upstairs. Her laugh. My stomach churned. Steeling myself, I crept up the stairs, each step feeling like a march toward my own execution. The laughter grew louder as I approached our bedroom. The door was ajar, and through the narrow opening, I saw them. Emily and Jake. They were sitting on our bed, talking in hushed tones. Jake leaned closer to her, his hand brushing her arm. Emily giggled, her cheeks flushed. She looked happy. Radiant. A version of her I hadn't seen in years. My world collapsed. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I felt frozen, like a ghost in my own life, watching from the shadows as they violated the sanctity of our marriage and friendship. I didn't need to see anything more. This was enough. But then Jake leaned in, his lips capturing hers in a kiss so intimate it tore through me like a knife. My paralysis shattered, replaced by a tidal wave of rage. Without thinking, I shoved the door open. It hit the wall with a deafening crash, startling them both. Emily gasped, scrambling to her feet, while Jake's face drained of color. "Dan!" Emily's voice was a mix of shock and panic. I can explain." "Explain what?" I said, my voice shaking. "Explain how my best friend and my wife are making out on our bed? Explain how you've both been lying to me?" Jake stammered, trying to rise from the bed. "Dan, listen, it's not what it looks like." "Don't you dare!" I snapped, my voice rising. "Don't you even try to insult me with that line." The room was suffocating with tension. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she reached out toward me. "Please, Dan, just let me explain. It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly, cutting her off. "Not what I think? Emily, I saw the text. I've seen enough." The realization of what I'd said hit her. Her face crumpled. You've been spying on me?" "I had to," I shot back. "Because you wouldn't tell me the truth." Jake finally found his voice. "Look, Dan, let's talk about this. We're adults." "Adults?" I roared. "You mean you, sneaking around behind my back with my wife?" I stepped closer, my fists clenched. Jake backed away, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Let's not do anything rash." I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to feel my fist connect with his smug face, but I stopped myself. Not here. Not now. Instead, I turned my attention to Emily. She was crying now, her face buried in her hands. "Why, Emily?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why him? Why do this?" She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "I was lonely, Dan. You were always working, and I felt invisible." "Invisible?" I spat. "So your solution was to run to my best friend? To betray me like this?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered. "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You've succeeded." I turned and walked out, ignoring their shouts behind me. I needed air, space, anything to escape the suffocating reality of what I'd just witnessed. As I stepped outside, Griffin approached me from his car, his face grim. "You got what you needed?" I asked, my voice hollow. He nodded. "It's all documented. I'll send you the files tonight." "Good," I said. "Because this isn't over." As I drove away, the image of them together burned into my mind. I made a vow. Emily and Jake thought they'd gotten away with this. They thought they'd control how this story ended. They were wrong. The drive away from the house felt surreal, like I was floating through a bad dream. The weight of what I'd seen pressed down on me, threatening to crush me entirely. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, but I ignored it, unwilling to hear Emily or Jake's pitiful excuses. Their betrayal was all the answer I needed. I pulled into a small, empty park on the outskirts of town, parking under the shade of an old oak tree. For a long time, I just sat there, staring blankly at the dashboard, my mind replaying the scene over and over. Emily's laughter. Jake's hand on her arm. The kiss. My stomach churned, and I stepped out of the car, gulping in the cool air. The world outside seemed cruelly serene, birds chirping, a gentle breeze rustling the leaves, children laughing in the distance. It was as though the universe had moved on while my life had come to a screeching halt. I sat down on a bench, gripping the wooden slats tightly as if they were the only thing anchoring me to reality. Rage simmered beneath the surface, but it was tempered by a deeper, more insidious pain. This wasn't just my wife's betrayal, it was my best friend's too. A double-edged blade that cut me to the core. Griffin's words from earlier came back to me. You'll have what you need to decide your next steps. The files, the photos, the evidence, they were all tools. Tools I could use to dismantle the web of lies Emily and Jake had spun. But I wasn't ready to act yet. Not without a plan. I pulled out my phone, finally checking the missed calls and texts. Emily's name dominated the screen, each message more frantic than the last. Dan, please call me. I can explain. Don't shut me out. We need to talk. It wasn't what it looked like. Please, just hear me out. I scrolled past her messages, my jaw tightening. Then, to my surprise, a text from Jake appeared. Dan, I'm sorry. Let's meet and talk this out. Don't do anything drastic. The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Don't do anything drastic? He'd destroyed my trust, my marriage, my life, and he thought a conversation could fix it? I closed the messages without replying, my hands shaking with fury. I needed an outlet, something to ground me before I exploded. I opened my contacts and scrolled to my brother Aaron. He answered after the second ring. Hey, Dan. What's up? Aaron, I said, my voice cracking. I need to talk to someone. Are you free? There was a pause, and then his tone shifted to concern. Yeah, of course. Where are you? I'm at Hollow Creek Park, I said. Can you meet me here? Give me 20 minutes, he replied. Hang tight. Aaron arrived faster than I expected, pulling up in his old Jeep and jogging over to the bench where I sat. He took one look at me and frowned. You look like hell, man. What's going on? For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words felt too big, too heavy. But Aaron just sat there, waiting, his presence steady and grounding. Emily's been cheating on me, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. With Jake. Aaron's face darkened, his hands balling into fists. Jake? Your best friend Jake? I nodded, and the words started spilling out, everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned, and the weeks of suspicion leading up to it. Aaron listened without interrupting, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. When I finished, he let out a long breath, shaking his head. That bastard. I always thought he was too slick for his own good. And Emily. He trailed off, his voice tinged with disappointment. Man, I'm so sorry. I can't believe they'd do this to you. I don't know what to do, I admitted, my voice breaking. I feel like my whole life's falling apart. Aaron placed a hand on my shoulder. You don't have to figure it out alone. We'll get through this. Whatever you need, I'm here. His words brought a small measure of comfort, but the pain remained. Thanks, Aaron. I can't let them get away with this. You shouldn't, he said firmly. But don't do anything rash. You're better than that. I nodded, though my mind was already racing with possibilities. I wouldn't let them ruin me. I wouldn't let them walk away from this unscathed. That night, I returned home to find Emily waiting for me. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her eyes lit up when she saw me, but I didn't stop to speak. Instead, I walked past her, heading straight for the bedroom to pack a bag. Dan, please, she called after me. We need to talk. I ignored her, grabbing clothes and toiletries and stuffing them into a duffel. She appeared in the doorway, her hands clasped together in a pleading gesture. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I turned to face her, my expression cold. "You should have thought of that before you betrayed me." Her tears flowed freely now. "It didn't mean anything, Dan. I was lonely, and I made a mistake. Please don't throw everything away." "I'm throwing everything away." I laughed bitterly. "You did that the moment you invited Jake into our bed." Her face crumpled, and for a fleeting moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But the memory of her betrayal hardened my resolve. "I'm staying with Aaron for now," I said, slinging the bag over my shoulder. "Don't call me. Don't text me. We're done talking." "Dan." I walked out before she could finish, the sound of her sobs following me down the stairs. As I stepped outside into the cool night air, I felt a strange mix of grief and determination. The life I thought I had was gone, but I wasn't going to let her or Jake define how this story ended. The drive to Aaron's house was silent, the radio off, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Each mile put more distance between me and the chaos I had left behind, but it couldn't erase the betrayal etched into my mind. Emily's tears, Jake's cowardly retreat, they were seared into my memory like scars. When I arrived, Aaron was waiting on the porch, a beer in hand and a look of grim determination on his face. He didn't say much, just clapped me on the back as I stepped inside. The house smelled of cedar and leather, and the quiet steadiness of his home was a balm to my frayed nerves. "You hungry?" he asked, closing the door behind me. "Not really," I said, setting my bag down in the hallway. I don't know." He handed me a beer. "Sit. Talk if you want. Don't if you don't." I sank into the worn leather couch, the weight of the day settling over me like a lead blanket. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound. "I'm going to destroy them," I said finally, my voice low but firm. Aaron raised an eyebrow. "Destroy them how?" I looked at him, my grip tightening around the beer bottle. "I'm not going to let them walk away from this unscathed. I want them to feel what they've done. I want them to regret it." Aaron leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Revenge is a tricky thing, Dan. You sure you want to go down that road?" "I'm sure," I said, the bitterness in my tone leaving no room for doubt. "They took everything from me, my trust, my marriage, my peace. They don't get to just move on like nothing happened." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough. So what's the plan?" The next morning, I met with James Griffin in a diner a few towns over. The PI slid a thick manila envelope across the table, his face impassive. "Everything's in here," he said. "Photos, timestamps, texts. It's airtight." I opened the envelope and leafed through the contents. The photos of Emily and Jake were like daggers to the heart, but they also fueled the fire burning inside me. This wasn't just evidence, it was power. "You've done good work," I said, sliding the envelope back to him. Griffin nodded. "I'll keep the files on hand if you need additional copies." "What's next?" I stared at the black coffee in front of me, the swirling liquid mirroring the storm in my chest. "Now I make them pay." Back at Aaron's house, I started piecing together the plan. Step 1 was ensuring that Emily couldn't control the narrative. She was already skilled at manipulating emotions, as I'd seen with her crocodile tears the night before. But the evidence I had would strip away any facade she tried to build. First, I called our lawyer to discuss divorce proceedings. I wanted everything in motion immediately. My state didn't require proof of infidelity to file, but the documentation would still be useful if Emily tried to contest anything. I was determined to fight for every asset and make sure Jake's involvement didn't go unnoticed. Next, I drafted an email. It was short, professional, and attached a selection of the most damning photos and messages Griffin had provided. I sent it to Jake's wife, Claire. She deserved to know what kind of man she was married to. Finally, I made a series of calls to mutual friends, subtly seeding the truth of what had happened. I didn't want to sound bitter or vengeful, I just wanted them to know the facts. The news spread like wildfire, and by the end of the day, I was already receiving supportive texts and calls from people who had once thought Emily and Jake could do no wrong. That evening, Aaron joined me in his garage, where he was tinkering with his motorcycle. The rhythmic clink of tools was oddly soothing as we talked. "So you've burned the social bridges," he said, tightening a bolt. "What about legal action?" "Already in progress," I said. "The lawyer's on it. And I've sent everything to Jake's wife. Let's see how he likes dealing with the fallout at home." Aaron grinned. "I'd pay good money to be a fly on the wall for that conversation." Despite everything, I chuckled. The thought of Jake squirming under Claire's wrath brought a flicker of satisfaction. "You know," Aaron said, leaning against the workbench, "revenge might feel good in the moment, but it won't fix the pain." "I know," I said, sighing. "But it's not just about revenge. It's about taking back control. For so long, I've been in the dark, letting them manipulate me. Not anymore." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Just don't let it consume you. There's life after this, Dan. Don't lose sight of that." "I won't," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. For now, all I could see was the next move in my plan. That night I got a text from Jake's wife. "Claire, we need to talk. I can't believe this. Thank you for telling me." As I read her words, a strange sense of relief washed over me. Jake's perfect little world was beginning to crack, just as mine had. And this was only the beginning. The morning light streamed through the blinds of Aaron's guest room, but sleep had evaded me for most of the night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the events of the past days replaying in my mind like a broken record. Despite everything, there was a hollow emptiness where satisfaction should have been. Revenge wasn't as sweet as I had hoped, it was messy, exhausting, and somehow left me feeling even more untethered. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, pulling me from my thoughts. It was a message from Claire, Jake's wife. "Claire." I confronted him. He admitted to everything. "I feel like my life is falling apart. Can we talk?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. What could I offer her? Comfort? Wisdom? My own life was a train wreck, hardly a source of stability. But Claire deserved to know she wasn't alone in this. "Me. I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm free to talk later today if you want." Her response came almost immediately. "Claire. Thank you. Let's meet at Café Luna at 3. By 2:45, I was seated at a corner table in the quaint little café, nursing a black coffee. Claire arrived a few minutes later, her face pale and drawn. She was a petite woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that now seemed clouded with sorrow. She slid into the chair opposite me, her movements slow and deliberate. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "Of course." For a moment we sat in silence, the hum of the café filling the void. Finally she spoke. "He confessed," she said, her hands gripping the edges of the table. "Everything. The lies, the sneaking around. All of it." I didn't know how to respond, so I let her keep going. "I feel so stupid," she continued, her voice cracking. "How could I not see it? How could I believe all his excuses?" "You're not stupid," I said firmly. "They were the ones lying, deceiving. That's on them, not you." She gave a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "He said he didn't mean for it to happen, that it just got out of hand. As if that makes it better." I clenched my jaw. Jake's words sounded eerily similar to Emily's pathetic excuses. "They always have an excuse," I muttered. Claire studied me, her sharp gaze returning. "What about you? How are you holding up?" I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Angry mostly. But I'm trying to channel that into action. I've started divorce proceedings, made sure everyone knows the truth. It's not much, but it's something." She nodded slowly. "I've already called a lawyer. There's no coming back from this." We sat there for over an hour, sharing stories and comparing notes on their betrayal. It was painful but oddly cathartic, knowing someone else understood the depth of the wound. By the time we parted ways, I felt a strange sense of solidarity with her, a shared resolve to rebuild our lives from the rubble Jake and Emily had left behind. When I got back to Aaron's house, I found him in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He glanced up as I walked in. "How was the meeting?" he asked. "Hard," I admitted, grabbing a soda from the fridge. "But good. Claire's strong. She's already making plans to move forward." Aaron nodded. "Good for her. And you?" I shrugged. "I'm trying. It's all I can do." He set down the knife and leaned against the counter, studying me. "You've got the evidence, the lawyers, and the support. What's the endgame, Dan? What's going to give you peace?" That question hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't thought much beyond the immediate need for revenge. What would peace even look like? Could I find it after everything? "I don't know," I admitted. "But I can't stop now." Aaron sighed, his face a mix of concern and understanding. "Just don't lose yourself in this, man. Revenge won't fix everything." "I know," I said, though the words felt hollow. The next day, I received an unexpected call from my lawyer. "We have a situation," he said, his tone cautious. "Emily's reached out, and she's threatening to contest the divorce unless you agree to certain terms." "What terms?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "She wants to split everything 50-50, no exceptions, and she's pushing for alimony. She's also asking to keep the house." I clenched my fist so tightly my nails dug into my palm. "She cheats on me, and she has the audacity to make demands?" "I thought you'd say that," he replied dryly. "Don't worry. With the evidence you've provided, we're in a strong position to fight this. But it's going to get messy." "Let it," I said. "I'm not backing down." Hanging up the phone, I felt the fire reignite. Emily thought she could play the victim, twist the narrative in her favor. But she didn't realize who she was dealing with. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. The days following my lawyer's call were a whirlwind of paperwork, strategy meetings, and sleepless nights. Every interaction with Emily through legal channels seemed to escalate her hostility. The once tearful pleas I had ignored were replaced by icy defiance, as though she thought digging her heels in would somehow absolve her of guilt. Aaron's advice about not losing myself in this war echoed in my mind, but every time I saw her name in an email or heard it in a voicemail, the anger surged anew. She wasn't just trying to take the house or money, she was trying to rewrite history, casting herself as the victim and painting me as the controlling, unfeeling husband who drove her into Jake's arms. Jake, for his part, had been suspiciously quiet since the confrontation. Claire kept me updated on his movements through occasional texts. She was methodical, gathering evidence of her own and quietly freezing his access to joint accounts. I admired her precision and wondered if she found the same grim satisfaction in dismantling his life as I did. Late one evening, my lawyer called again. His tone was urgent. "Dan, we need to talk." "Emily's lawyer filed a counterclaim today." "What kind of counterclaim?" I asked, already bracing for the worst. "She's accusing you of emotional neglect and claims it created a toxic environment that led to her affair. She's using it to justify her demands for alimony and the house." I laughed bitterly. "She cheats on me, and now I'm the one to blame?" "It's a common tactic," he said. "Don't worry, we'll push back hard. The evidence of her infidelity is damning enough, and the narrative she's spinning doesn't hold up under scrutiny. But I need you to be prepared. This is going to get personal." "It already is," I muttered. Hanging up, I felt a familiar surge of fury. Emily wasn't just fighting to protect herself, she was trying to destroy me in the process. And I wasn't going to let her. I called Claire the next morning, needing to vent to someone who truly understood the depths of this betrayal. "She's unbelievable," I said, pacing the guest room. "She's actually trying to paint herself as the victim." Claire sighed on the other end. "Jake's been trying the same thing. He says I was distant and unappreciative. As if that justifies anything. It's pathetic." I said, sitting down heavily on the bed. They're both pathetic. Claire hesitated before speaking again. Have you thought about what you'll do when this is all over? When the dust settles? The question caught me off guard. Not really. I'm just trying to get through this. You should think about it, she said gently. It's easy to let the anger consume you, but at some point, you'll need to figure out what comes next. I didn't answer right away. Claire was right, of course, but thinking about the future felt impossible when the present was still so raw. Later that week, I received an email from Griffin, my PI. He had continued monitoring Jake and Emily at my request, and his findings only fueled the fire. They'd been meeting regularly at his place. Griffin said when we spoke. Discreet, but not careful enough. I've got photos and timestamps if you need them. I gritted my teeth. Send them over. I want every shred of evidence. The files arrived in my inbox that evening, and I opened them with a mix of dread and determination. The images were damning. Emily leaving Jake's house late at night, the two of them walking together at a park, his hand on her lower back. I forwarded the files to my lawyer with a single line, use these as needed. The next day, I met with Aaron in his garage. He was working on his motorcycle again, the rhythmic clink of tools filling the air. How's it going? He asked without looking up. She's ramping things up, I said, leaning against the workbench. Making all kinds of accusations to justify her demands. He set down his wrench and gave me a hard look. And you? How are you holding up? I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Aaron sighed, wiping his hands on a rag. You know, this whole thing's a mess. But you can't let her drag you down to her level. Fight smart, not dirty. I nodded, though my mind was already racing with ideas for the next move. Aaron meant well, but he didn't understand the full depth of what Emily and Jake had done. They didn't deserve mercy, they deserved to face the full consequences of their actions. By the time I returned to Aaron's house, I had made up my mind. The gloves were coming off. Emily and Jake wanted to play dirty? Fine. I'd meet them on their level, and I wouldn't hold back. The decision to escalate wasn't one I made lightly. But Emily and Jake had left me no choice. Their audacity, their willingness to twist the truth to suit their narrative, it demanded a response. I wouldn't let them rewrite the story of my life while they skated away unscathed. The first step was preparing for the inevitable court battle. My lawyer, Mark, was relentless in his pursuit of justice. With Griffin's evidence in hand, he began dismantling Emily's claims piece by piece. Every email, text, and photo was catalogued and ready to be presented if Emily pushed her accusations too far. They'll have a hard time arguing for alimony when we can prove she's been financially supported by Jake for months, Mark said during one of our meetings. What about the house? I asked, my voice tight. That's going to be a sticking point, he admitted. But with the evidence of her infidelity, we can argue that she forfeited her moral claim to it. It won't be easy, but we have a solid case. I nodded, gripping the edge of the conference table. Whatever it takes. Outside the legal realm, I decided it was time to confront Jake directly. I'd spent weeks avoiding him, letting my anger simmer in silence. But if he thought he could hide behind Emily or avoid responsibility, he was sorely mistaken. I called him late one evening, my tone cold and measured. We need to talk. There was a pause on the other end before he answered. Dan, I don't think. This isn't up for discussion, I snapped. Meet me at Griffin's Tavern tomorrow at 8. Don't make me come looking for you. He muttered something about being busy, but I cut him off. You owe me this, Jake. Be there. The next night, I arrived at the tavern early, nursing a beer as I waited. The place was dimly lit, with the low hum of conversation filling the space. My heart pounded as I stared at the door, rehearsing everything I wanted to say. Jake walked in a few minutes after 8, his shoulders hunched and his eyes darting around the room. When he spotted me, he hesitated, but I waved him over. He approached cautiously, like a man walking into a lion's den. Sit, I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. He obeyed, avoiding my gaze as he settled into the seat. Dan, look! Save it! I interrupted. This isn't the time for your excuses. He fell silent, his hands fidgeting on the table. For a moment I just stared at him, the man I had once called my best friend. The man who had thrown years of friendship away for a cheap betrayal. You're a coward, Jake, I said finally, my voice low and steady. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed Claire, my marriage, and everything we built together. And for what? For a few stolen moments with Emily? He opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. Don't insult me with your justifications. I've seen the evidence. I know everything. He shifted uncomfortably, his face pale. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Then what way was it supposed to happen? I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Were you going to confess when it was convenient? Or just keep sneaking around until you got caught? He looked down at his hands, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. You didn't mean to hurt me? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed 2 families, Jake. You've burned every bridge, and for what? Some twisted fantasy? I don't know, he muttered. I leaned forward, my voice hardening. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave Claire with whatever she wants in the divorce. No fights, no arguments. And as for me? You're going to stay the hell out of my life. Forever. His eyes widened. Dan, come on. No, I said sharply. You don't get to come on me, Jake. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences. I stood, tossing a few bills onto the table to cover the tab. This is the last time we speak. Don't contact me, don't come near me, and don't even think about trying to explain yourself to Claire. You're dead to me. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out, the weight of the confrontation lifting slightly as I stepped into the cool night air. Over the next few weeks, the fallout continued to unfold. Claire followed through with her divorce, taking Jake for everything he was worth. Emily, still fighting me in court, began to unravel under the pressure. The lies she had spun were starting to collapse, and her carefully crafted image was cracking. One evening, Aaron handed me a beer as we sat on his back porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. You did good, Dan, he said. You stood your ground. You didn't let them break you. I nodded, sipping the beer. I'm not sure I feel good about any of it. But at least it's almost over. Aaron glanced at me, his expression thoughtful. Almost. But what comes next? The question lingered in the air, heavy with possibility. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to think about it, not the past, not the betrayal, but the future. And while the path ahead was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't let them define me. Not anymore. As the weeks passed, the chaos surrounding Emily and Jake began to settle into a strained normalcy. The court proceedings moved forward, grinding slowly but predictably. My lawyer, Mark, assured me we were in a strong position, but every meeting with him felt like reopening a wound that hadn't yet healed. Each detail of the divorce, property, finances, assets, felt clinical, devoid of the emotions tied to them. But emotions had a way of seeping in. Emily's attempts to paint herself as a victim gained little traction, thanks to the mountain of evidence I had gathered. She still pushed back, arguing for the house and alimony, but her arguments held no weight against the facts. The truth was on my side, and though it didn't make the process any less painful, it gave me the strength to keep going. Meanwhile, Jake had disappeared from my life entirely, as I demanded. Claire kept me updated occasionally, brief texts or calls letting me know how her divorce was progressing. Jake's charm and bravado hadn't helped him much. She'd taken full control of their shared assets, leaving him scrambling to pick up the pieces. Good riddance, she'd said during our last phone call. He deserves every bit of it. I couldn't argue with her. One afternoon, I returned to Aaron's house to find a thick envelope waiting for me. The return address was from Mark's office, and my stomach tightened as I opened it. Inside were copies of the finalized divorce papers, signed by Emily. It was done. For a moment, I just stared at the papers, the words blurring together. I should have felt relief, closure, even, but instead, there was a hollow ache in my chest. 8 years of marriage reduced to a few legal documents. Aaron walked in as I sat there, envelope in hand. He glanced at me and then at the papers. "It's over?" I nodded, unable to speak. He sat down across from me, his expression unreadable. "How do you feel?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice hoarse. "Empty, I guess." "That's normal," he said. "It's a big loss, even if you know it's for the best." I nodded, but the words felt distant. Loss didn't even begin to cover it. That evening, I took a drive, needing to clear my head. I found myself at the edge of town, near a secluded overlook where Emily and I had spent so many nights early in our relationship. We'd come here to talk, laugh, and plan our future together. Now, it felt like a graveyard for memories. I stepped out of the car and leaned against the hood, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. The weight of everything pressed down on me: Emily's betrayal, Jake's deceit, the destruction of a life I thought was unshakable. For the first time since it all began, I let myself cry. Not out of anger or frustration, but out of grief. Grief for the man I used to be, the life I used to have, and the love I thought was real. Over the next few days, I began the slow process of rebuilding. I started looking for a place of my own, determined to move forward. Aaron helped me search, and after a few weeks, I found a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Moving day was bittersweet. Aaron and a few other friends helped me haul boxes and furniture, cracking jokes to lighten the mood. But as I unpacked alone that night, the emptiness of the space felt overwhelming. I picked up a photo of my parents that I'd placed on the mantel, a reminder of the strength they'd instilled in me. They'd faced their own hardships, and I could almost hear my dad's voice. "You can't change what happened, son. All you can do is decide what you're going to do next." A week later, I received a call from Claire. Her divorce had been finalized, and she sounded lighter, freer than I'd ever heard her. "I'm thinking about leaving town," she said. "Starting fresh somewhere new." "That sounds like a good idea," I said. "You deserve it." "So do you," she replied. "Don't let this hold you back, Dan. You've got a chance to rebuild. Take it." Her words stayed with me long after the call ended. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. That weekend, I returned to the overlook, this time with a notebook and pen. I didn't have a plan, just a desire to put my thoughts on paper. I wrote about the pain, the betrayal, and the anger, but also about the lessons I'd learned. As the sun set, I closed the notebook and stared out at the horizon. The ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it had lessened, replaced by a quiet determination. This was my life now, a blank slate, ready to be rebuilt. The weeks that followed were a blur of adjustment and reflection. Settling into the apartment was both liberating and challenging. I learned how to exist in the quiet spaces that were now solely mine, the hum of solitude replacing the chatter of a shared life. The divorce papers stared at me from a folder on my desk, a grim testament to the end of an era. But as much as they represented pain and betrayal, they also symbolized freedom, a chance to reclaim my life and start anew. One evening, Aaron showed up unannounced, a 6-pack in hand. "Figured you could use some company," he said, setting the beer on the counter. I laughed. "You're not wrong." We spent the night on the balcony, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again. "You're doing better," Aaron said after a while, studying me. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "It still hurts, but I think I'm ready to move forward." "Good," he said. "Because I've got news. Claire called me." I raised an eyebrow. "Claire?" He grinned. "Yeah. She's leaving town, but before she goes, she wants to meet up. Thought it might be good for both of you." I hesitated, the idea of seeing her again stirring something inside me, part curiosity, part apprehension. "Where and when?" I asked. Tomorrow. Cafe Luna, where you met before. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, nerves buzzing beneath the surface. Claire walked in a few minutes later, her face lit with a calm determination that I hadn't seen before. She looked different. Stronger. Hey, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Hey, I replied, smiling faintly. You look good. So do you, she said, her gaze warm but steady. We talked for hours, catching up on the fallout of our respective divorces and the plans we had for the future. Claire was moving to a small town upstate, where she'd found a job as an art gallery manager. She spoke about it with excitement, her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen before. You're really doing it, I said, impressed. I am, she said. And you should too. You've got a chance to start over, Dan. Don't waste it. Her words lingered with me long after we parted ways. Inspired by Claire's resolve, I began to think about what my new life could look like. I reached out to old friends, reconnected with hobbies I'd let slide, and even signed up for a woodworking class at a local community center, something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. The first class was awkward. My hands felt clumsy on the tools, and I fumbled through the instructions. But as the weeks went on, I found a rhythm, the act of shaping wood into something tangible becoming a form of therapy. The instructor, a retired carpenter named Mike, was patient and encouraging. You've got a knack for this, he said one evening, inspecting the bookshelf I was building. Thanks, I said, surprised at how much his praise meant. You thinking about doing this seriously? He asked. I shrugged. Maybe. For now, it's just a hobby. Well, if you ever want to take it further, let me know, he said. I could always use an extra pair of hands on my projects. By the time summer rolled around, I felt like a different person. The pain of Emily and Jake's betrayal hadn't vanished, but it no longer consumed me. My days were filled with small victories, finishing a woodworking project, making new friends, exploring the city. One afternoon, as I was sanding down a piece of oak for a coffee table, my phone buzzed. It was Claire. Claire, how's the new life coming along? I smiled, typing a quick reply. Me. One day at a time. Thanks for pushing me to move forward. Her response came almost immediately. Claire, that's what friends are for. Let me know when you're ready to visit. I'll show you around my new town. I stared at the message for a moment, a warmth spreading through me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like the future wasn't just a shadowy void. It was full of possibility. That evening, as I sat on my balcony with a beer in hand, I watched the city lights twinkle in the distance. The ache in my chest had dulled, replaced by something quieter, steadier. This wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in months, that felt like enough. The rhythm of my new life began to take shape in ways I hadn't expected. Each day brought small, incremental progress, a morning run through the park, evenings spent in my woodworking class, and weekends exploring the city I had once taken for granted. Slowly, the jagged edges of betrayal and anger smoothed, leaving behind a quiet resolve. One morning, as I sat in my modest kitchen with a cup of coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from my lawyer, Mark. Subject: Final Settlement Agreement. Dan. Attached are the finalized terms of your divorce settlement. Congratulations on putting this chapter behind you. I opened the attachment and scanned the document, my heart racing. The house was mine, Emily had agreed to no alimony, and the division of assets leaned heavily in my favor, thanks to the evidence we had presented. It was a clean break, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I texted Aaron to share the news. Me. It's done. The settlement's finalized. Aaron. About time. Congrats, man. Drinks tonight to celebrate? Me. Absolutely. Later that evening, we gathered at a small bar downtown. A few of our old friends joined us, turning it into an impromptu reunion. For the first time in what felt like forever, I laughed freely, the weight of the past months lifting as the night went on. Aaron raised his glass for a toast. To Dan, for coming out of this mess stronger than ever. And to new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. The next day, I found myself back at the woodworking shop, finishing the coffee table I had been working on for weeks. As I sanded the final edge, Mike, my instructor, walked over, a grin on his face. "You've got a real talent for this, Dan," he said, inspecting the table. "Ever think about taking on bigger projects?" I shrugged. "I don't know. It's been a good distraction, but I'm not sure I'm ready to take it further." "Well, think about it," he said. "I've got a client who's looking for custom-built furniture. If you're interested, I could pass your name along." I hesitated, the idea both exciting and daunting. "I'll think about it," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. That weekend, I received another text from Claire. "Claire, how's the woodworking going?" "Me. Pretty good. Just finished a coffee table." "You?" "Claire. Settling in. Found a great little diner that serves the best pie I've ever had. You should visit." The invitation gave me pause. Part of me was tempted to take her up on it, but another part of me wasn't sure if I was ready. My wounds were healing, but they were still fresh, and I didn't want to rush into anything that could complicate my progress. "Me. I'll take you up on that one day." "Thanks, Claire." Her reply was immediate. "Claire, I'll hold you to it." Life continued to move forward, each day a step further from the wreckage of my past. My apartment began to feel less like a temporary refuge and more like a home. The coffee table I'd built became a centerpiece, a tangible reminder of what I could accomplish when I put my energy into something productive. Aaron visited often, always checking in to make sure I wasn't falling back into old patterns of anger or despair. "You're doing good," he'd say. "Don't lose sight of that." And he was right. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally on solid ground. One evening, as I sat on my balcony with a notebook in hand, I began jotting down ideas, not just for woodworking projects, but for life. Places I wanted to visit, things I wanted to try, goals I had set aside for too long. I realized then that the betrayal I had endured, while painful, had given me something I hadn't expected: clarity. It had stripped away the distractions and forced me to confront who I was and what I wanted. And for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. The slow transformation of my life continued to unfold. The apartment no longer felt like a place of retreat but rather a symbol of my independence, a blank canvas on which I could create a new chapter. I filled the space with reminders of who I was becoming, shelves I built myself, plants I managed to keep alive, and a growing collection of books on everything from woodworking to philosophy. The woodworking class ended, but my passion for it didn't. Mike followed through on his offer, connecting me with a client looking for custom furniture. The project, a set of handmade dining chairs, was both intimidating and thrilling. I spent hours in the workshop, refining my craft, pouring myself into every detail. When the chairs were delivered, the client, a middle-aged couple who ran a boutique hotel, couldn't stop gushing over my work. "These are beautiful," the woman said, running her fingers along the polished wood. "You have a real gift." Her words stayed with me as I drove home, a sense of pride swelling in my chest. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt like I was building something meaningful again. Claire and I stayed in touch, her texts and calls a steady source of encouragement. She sent updates about her new job, the friends she was making, and the small victories she celebrated in her fresh start. "I'm taking a painting class," she said one evening over the phone. "I figured it was time to embrace something creative." "That's great," I said, smiling. "You'll have to send me pictures of your masterpieces." She laughed. "Don't give your hopes up. Right now, it's more like finger painting for adults." Our conversations were light, supportive, and free of the heaviness that had defined the early days of our connection. For both of us, the wounds were healing, and the future felt less daunting. One Saturday, Aaron invited me to a barbecue at his house. It was a casual affair, just a few friends, good food, and plenty of laughter. As the evening wore on, I found myself leaning against the deck railing, watching the group mingle and joke. "You look deep in thought," Aaron said, joining me with a beer in hand. I shrugged. "Just taking it all in. It's been a while since I felt normal." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've come a long way, Dan. Don't forget to give yourself credit for that." "I'm trying," I said, and I meant it. The next week, I received an email from the boutique hotel couple. They loved the chairs so much that they wanted me to design a custom headboard for one of their guest suites. The project was bigger than anything I'd done before, but I couldn't resist the challenge. I threw myself into the work, spending late nights in the workshop and weekends sourcing materials. The process was demanding but deeply satisfying. When the headboard was finally complete, I stood back and admired it, a solid oak piece with intricate carvings and a smooth, polished finish. Delivering it to the hotel was another proud moment. The couple's reaction was even more enthusiastic than before, and they promised to recommend me to their friends and guests. That evening I texted Claire. "Me. Finished a big project today. Feeling good. How's the painting coming?" Her reply was quick. "Claire. Still terrible, but I'm having fun. When are you coming to visit? I owe you some pie." I stared at the message, a smile tugging at my lips. The idea of visiting her town didn't feel as daunting as it had before. "Me. Soon, maybe. We'll see." As summer turned to fall, I began to notice subtle but profound changes in myself. The anger that had once consumed me was gone, replaced by a quiet determination to move forward. I no longer saw myself as a victim of Emily and Jake's betrayal but as someone who had overcome it. One evening, while organizing my workshop, I stumbled across an old photo of Emily and me. It was from a trip we'd taken to the mountains years ago, our smiles bright and carefree. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness, but it quickly passed. I placed the photo in a box of old memories and set it aside. It belonged to a chapter of my life that was closed now, one that had taught me painful but necessary lessons. The next day, as I was sketching plans for a new project, my phone buzzed with another text from Claire. "Claire. Seriously, Dan. The pie's waiting. Don't make me eat it all myself." This time, I didn't hesitate. "Me. All right. When's good for you?" Her response came with a flurry of emojis and a date for the following weekend. When I pulled into her town a week later, the leaves were just starting to turn, painting the streets in shades of gold and crimson. Claire met me at the diner she'd mentioned, her smile warm and welcoming. "You made it," she said, hugging me lightly. "I couldn't let you eat all that pie alone," I replied, grinning. The evening was easy and unhurried, filled with laughter and stories. For the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine connection with someone, a reminder that life could still hold joy, even after heartbreak. As I drove back home that night, the road stretched out before me, full of possibility. The drive back from Claire's town left me with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The evening had been simple, a shared meal, laughter, and conversation, but it was exactly what I needed. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer defined by the pain of Emily and Jake's betrayal. Over the next few weeks, Claire and I continued to stay in touch. The connection between us deepened in subtle ways, though either of us rushed to label it. We were two people rebuilding our lives, finding comfort in the shared understanding of what we had endured. Meanwhile, my woodworking projects began to snowball. The boutique hotel had referred me to several of their contacts, and soon I found myself taking on more commissions than I'd anticipated. Each project pushed me to improve my craft, and the satisfaction of creating something tangible and lasting was deeply fulfilling. One afternoon, Mike stopped by my workshop to check on a project I was finishing for a local cafe. "You've got a good thing going here, Dan," he said, running his hand along the polished edge of the counter I was building. "Ever think about turning this into a full-time gig?" I hesitated, the idea both exciting and daunting. "I don't know. It's a big leap." "It is," he agreed. "But you've got the skill, and you've already built a reputation. People trust your work." The thought stayed with me long after he left. Could I really turn this passion into a career? One evening, while sketching out plans for a new project, I received a call from Claire. "I've got news," she said, her voice bright. "Good news, I hope?" "The best. My painting class is having a showcase, and I submitted one of my pieces." "That's amazing," I said, genuinely happy for her. "When's the showcase?" "Next month," she replied. "You're coming, right?" I paused, the thought of returning to her town bringing a mixture of anticipation and nerves. "I wouldn't miss it," I said finally. The following weeks flew by as I juggled projects and prepared for the trip. I finished the cafe counter just in time, delivering it to the owners, who were thrilled with the result. "This is perfect," one of them said, running her hand over the wood. "You've got a real talent, Dan." Hearing those words never got old. When the day of Claire's showcase arrived, I packed an overnight bag and hit the road early. The drive felt less daunting this time, the autumn scenery a soothing backdrop to my thoughts. Claire greeted me outside the gallery, her smile wide and infectious. She looked radiant, her confidence shining through in a way that made me pause. "You're here," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Of course," I replied. "Wouldn't miss it." The gallery was bustling with people admiring the artwork, and Claire's painting was prominently displayed near the entrance. It was an abstract piece, bold, colorful, and full of energy. "Wow," I said, genuinely impressed. "This is incredible." She blushed. "You're just saying that." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I mean it. It's amazing." We spent the evening mingling with the crowd, her excitement contagious. Seeing her in her element, thriving and confident, was a reminder of how far we'd both come. After the showcase, we walked through the quiet streets of her town, the cool night air crisp and refreshing. "Thank you for coming," she said, glancing at me. "It means a lot." "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied. "You've worked hard for this. You should be proud." She smiled, her gaze thoughtful. "I am. And I'm proud of you too, you know. You've come so far." Her words settled over me like a warm blanket, and for the first time, I allowed myself to believe them. The next morning, as I prepared to head home, Claire handed me a small package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Just something to remember your visit," she said with a smile. I opened it when I got home, a small, framed painting she'd done of a mountain landscape. The simplicity and beauty of it struck me, and I placed it on my desk as a reminder of the journey we were both on. Life continued to move forward. My woodworking projects flourished, and I began to seriously consider turning it into a full-time business. Claire and I stayed in touch, our bond growing stronger with each passing week. The pain of the past hadn't vanished, but it no longer defined me. Each day was a step towards something new, something better. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I was excited about what the future might hold. 6 months after everything had fallen apart, I stood in my workshop, watching the sunlight stream through the wide windows. It was quiet except for the hum of tools and the gentle rhythm of sandpaper against wood. The scent of sawdust filled the air, grounding me in the moment. The piece I was working on, a custom oak dining table, was my biggest project yet. It would go to a family I'd met through a referral, their excitement about the piece a reminder of how far I'd come. The table was more than a job, it was a testament to the life I was rebuilding. Claire and I had grown closer over the months, our connection evolving into something more profound. We'd taken things slow, careful not to repeat the mistakes of the past. Each visit, each phone call, had been a step towards something we couldn't quite name but both understood. That morning, as I worked on the table, she texted me. "Claire, big news. Call me when you're free." Curiosity piqued, I wiped my hands on a rag and dialed her number. She answered on the first ring. "You're in a good mood," I said, grinning. "I got offered the gallery manager position," she said, her excitement bubbling through the phone. "Full-time, with a raise and everything." "That's amazing, Claire," I said, genuinely thrilled for her. "You deserve it." "Thank you," she said, her voice softening. "I couldn't have gotten through all of this without you, you know." The words hung between us, carrying a weight we didn't need to explain. You helped me too, I said. More than you know. The following weekend, I drove to her town to celebrate. We spent the evening at the same diner where we'd first reconnected, sharing stories and laughter over pie and coffee. I've been thinking, she said, her gaze steady, about what's next for us. I set my coffee down, meeting her eyes. Me too. I don't want to rush anything, she continued. But I don't want to hold back either. It feels right. It does, I said, reaching for her hand. I'm ready if you are. She smiled, and the warmth of it melted away the last remnants of doubt. A few months later, I officially launched my woodworking business. It started small, just me, a website, and a few loyal clients, but it quickly grew. Orders poured in, and I found myself thriving in a way I hadn't imagined. Aaron helped me move into a bigger workshop, and Mike occasionally stopped by to lend a hand or offer advice. The work was challenging, but it was mine, and every piece I created felt like a step toward a brighter future. Claire and I spent weekends exploring each other's lives, finding a balance that worked for us. She visited my workshop, marveling at the pieces I was building, and I attended her gallery openings, proud of her accomplishments. One evening, as we walked along a trail near her town, the sun setting behind the hills, I stopped and turned to her. You know, I said, taking her hand, I never thought I'd get here. Not after everything. She squeezed my hand. Neither did I. But here we are. Here we are, I echoed, pulling her close. The journey from betrayal to healing had been long and painful, but it had also been transformative. I'd lost what I thought was everything, only to find a new version of myself, a stronger, more self-assured version. Emily and Jake were nothing more than shadows of a past life. I hadn't heard from them in months, and I didn't care to. Their chapter was closed, and I had no reason to revisit it. Instead, I focused on the life I was building with Claire, a life grounded in trust, respect, and the shared understanding of what it meant to overcome heartbreak. As I stood in my workshop one evening, putting the finishing touches on a new project, I looked at the framed painting Claire had given me. The mountain landscape felt like a symbol of the journey we'd both taken, the climb, the struggle, and the beauty of reaching the other side. For the first time in years I felt whole. And for the first time ever, I felt free.